Welcome to Shelf Talkers, a podcast from Village Well Books and Coffee in downtown Culver City. Welcome back to Shelf Talkers. My name is Jared Castelo. I'm one of the booksellers here at Village Well, and I am joined by Julia Elizabeth Evans, one of my coworkers and my co-host.
Hey guys, books are bound, and I'm bounded here on my bike. So love being at the Village Well, and I love talking about books.
We love talking about books. We are excited for these shelves to talk to us, as this is Shelf Talkers, and so we're so excited today to be joined by our guest, the author of the horror novel Maeve Fly. This is CJ Leede. How you doing, CJ?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
Doing good. Thank you so much for being here.
So we always offer our guests a cup of coffee or a drink from the Village Well, and CJ decided to go with water, which is great. But we had
Are you a coffee drinker?
we had a whole mythology about coffee lined up to dive in.
I'm gonna grab one after, and it's always black coffee for me, and I've already had a whole pot this morning.
A whole pot? What's a whole pot? Like 2 or 3 cups?
Yeah, like 3.
That's a good
and then
amount of coffee.
yeah, we do what we gotta do.
You're feeling pretty wired today.
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling chilling.
I love that.
We did discuss our breakfasts.
Shameful, actually, today.
Yeah, today all 3 of us just had
Oh, really?
breakfast bars.
Prepackaged breakfast.
We're, as CJ said, we're just all very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're all just rushing out the door trying to be on Shelf Talkers today.
just couldn't wait.
Yeah. As we talk about the books, I know you've been to the store a lot. You said you've been many a time. You're excited that it opened as an LA local, which is really fun. Have you seen that around the store we do these things that we call Shelf Talkers, that we put, they're like the little cards that we put in on the shelf.
I didn't realize you were calling those Shelf Talkers. Yeah, they're great.
So those are our little recommendations. Those are called Shelf Talkers. That was kind of the inspiration for the podcast. But would you give us like a 2 to 3 sentence Shelf Talker for Maeve Fly, your most recent novel?
Summarizing and pitching this book, like why you should read. Okay.
Yes.
So I, as far as what I'm allowed to say, trying to avoid a certain word of IP, I would say amusement park princess by day, serial killer by night. Read this book if you want misanthropic literature, bar crawls, messed up scary dolls, a lot of obscure YouTube and Reddit and internet rabbit holes.
That's so funny you brought up the IP that cannot be named.
Well, you can say whatever you want to say.
I'm allowed to? Yeah. Well, you're not allowed to say the name, but I'm allowed to say what I think the IP is.
Yep, my book takes place, partially in an amusement park in Anaheim that definitely doesn't exist in the real world.
I see.
That you've never been to.
Right. A famous fake amusement park that is also known as the happiest place on earth.
Yep.
In your universe.
Happiest place in the world, I believe, is how we had to say it.
Oh, that's beautiful. So because that tagline is also copyrighted?
Yeah.
Makes sense. I wouldn't have. So when you wrote the book, did you write it thinking?
It was written differently before,
and
it actually circulated this whole town written differently, and luckily nobody came after me, and please don't if you're listening to this. But it was just written the way that I thought it, and a number of legal teams weighed in on that.
Really?
How to change it, and how to get around things. And my favorite page of the book now is actually the disclaimer in the beginning of the book that says that both the LA Kings and the Disney Corporation did not in any way endorse this book.
Wow.
Which I love.
Even though you go out of your way to describe the Disney Corporation, you still then felt the need, the legal team still felt the need to say, this might bear resemblance to a company you're aware of, the largest media conglomerate in the world.
Yeah.
But we did not do that.
Listen, they've been cool. Like, so far so good, and there's no way that nobody knew. I think they just don't care. It's books. They're like, whatever, do what you want to do. I think Grady Hendrix did I know he did that whole IKEA book.
Right.
Which, by the way, is an awesome book if you haven't read it.
I haven't.
It's quite good. Horror store.
Okay.
And he was like, they don't care about you. They don't care about us. Like, we're authors. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Unless the IP gets picked up and now you got an IP battle.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I love that. That's so funny.
I mean, and I want to talk about the experience of reading the book and knowing because we all catch the reference. I mean, it's not even a reference. It's culturally who we all are as both LA dwellers, and American, just citizens of the world, consumers.
Well, the song, right? The song in the Ice Princess movie also is like has been such a part of life. It feels like for many years now.
I love the media training of the song in the Ice Princess movie. Like I love that. It's like that phrase didn't even seem like you needed to think through that phrase. You just knew that was the phrase. Yeah.
Wait, and can you like for people that haven't read the book that are just listening, can you set up Maeve Fly?
Yeah, so so this aspect of it is that she does play this Ice Princess character at work.
Maeve plays.
Maeve does, yes. Maeve in my book, Maeve Fly. Please buy it. Please buy it at the Village Well. She plays this character who I actually think is so interesting. And like, I haven't watched so many of these movies as an adult. I've been to the park twice as an adult, once before I wrote the book. And I just think this character, like, she's kind of this bizarre archetypal defiance, and I think that's a lot of why, like, young girls or young kids really respond to it, because she's the protagonist, but she's also the antagonist, and she's also, like, very powerful, and it doesn't come down to a love story or marriage, and I think there's something really interesting there. She kind of occupies the space of crone while being a young, beautiful princess. And that is like uncomfortable and interesting. And I wanted Maeve to be a similar kind of character who lives that solitary life that in folklore and in those cartoon movies growing up, we were taught is really reserved for older women who have outgrown their childbearing years, and thus their usefulness. So.
Dang. So did you kind of pick the occupation to juxtapose that with her
It just occurred. I don't know. It was a weird, like, I knew I wanted to rewrite Story of the Eye. That's where the whole thing started. So one thing about this book, Maeve Fly, is that it really is in conversation with 3 books, mostly. And that's American Psycho, Story of the Eye, and Notes from Underground. But also Fight Club comes in, Marquis de Sade comes in, other things come in. But those are the main ones. And I really wanted to rewrite Story of the Eye and wanted to see what that looked like in this day and age. And it was the weirdest thing. It was like, it just occurred to me, it had to be her job. And I wanted her to really unironically love it. And I really wanted her to be a character who loved things. I think we have a lot of like misanthropic, nihilistic characters, and that's interesting. But like, I also think it can be more interesting to live in the mind of somebody who has great loves in life and isn't just so bored by everything that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And can you just also because I actually was not familiar with Story of the Eye. Reading your book, and I know Notes from Underground, I know American Psycho, but what is Story of the Eye?
Story of the Eye is like a 90-page 1920s novella that has a lot of eggs. Well, okay, so it follows the pornographic exploits of a young teenage couple and ultimately culminates in, there's a lot of psychological torture, a lot of sexual use of eggs and urine and all kinds of things, and then ultimately culminates in a threesome-turn murder of a Spanish priest and the insertion of an eyeball into a body part that you could probably guess.
Okay.
Wow. So that's Story of the Eye. So.
And you said that. I want to write a new version of that.
Well, okay, yeah. So it's Georges Bataille, and I did an MFA, and in that MFA, nobody was talking anymore about guys like Bataille, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Somebody handed me that book at a party late night and was like, "Want to read something crazy?" But I thought, in many moves to bring new voices to the forefront, which is so important, it's the greatest thing we've done, right? It's the greatest thing we're still doing. I think that other voices were just like, okay, well, we don't need to hear those anymore. But I actually think instead of looking at it that way, I thought, well, okay, I'm a woman. I have not gotten to see myself in a Patrick Bateman role or in a in Story of the Eye, there actually is a female protagonist, but I don't know. I just wanted to see what that felt like to get to live in that space for a time, you know, as opposed to discarding it entirely. Like, why? Right. It's awesome.
Right. And Patrick Bateman being the American Psycho.
Yes.
Right.
And again, it's the same thing. I think, like, I've seen people kind of make moves to push that aside, and it's like, it rocks. That is a great book. American Psycho rocks. Brett is a great writer, and I don't know. I think there's a reason that culturally it had such a huge impact, just like this Ice Princess movie. Like, there are things that really affect us, and I just wanted to get to live in that for a bit. One
of the most interesting parts, I think, for me about the book, going back to the conversation around the happiest place in the world.
Yeah.
And versus, you know, all the references you have to Story of the Eye, which I've then learned about and looked up. But when you don't name the reference or the entity, which is Disney.
What?
It made for me reading it, the setting much spookier. My brain, because you hadn't named it, was just hovering over.
I love that.
Almost like the shark in Jaws.
Yeah, hovering over the all of the cultural like references, and I actually have a very personal connection to Disney. My grandfather was a 25th employee of Walt Disney World in Florida, and he was the head of trash collection. Disney is part of me and my family and my blood. You've only really been to Disneyland once, and so I only
been to the adventure park side, so, which is where, by the way, those two princesses happen to reside. I don't understand why, but
they just got to divide them somehow.
Yeah.
It is really magical, actually.
It's magical. I actually went last week. We had family in town from the East Coast, and we went.
And that was your second time.
I finally got to go, to the other. We went on the Haunted Mansion. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I actually kind of got stuck on that ride.
Yeah, that's fun.
It was kind of amazing.
Well, it's magical. I say this meaningfully or sincerely, because the fact that I just assumed that you, like me, had all of this
intimate knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Familial, intimate knowledge of Disney and its operation, but.
Well, you know, it was COVID. So when I wrote this book, we were all on lockdown, and I watched a lot of YouTube walkthroughs of the Halloween party, and I read a lot of Reddit threads, and there's and then I just made some shit up too.
Yeah,
you know?
And that kind of gets to the point about when you're writing fiction, how much is it research and how much is it your own point of view? And I think it's cool that you were just had the wherewithal to be I don't know much about this. It's everywhere, or it's everything in our culture, but I'm gonna write about it. And you wrote.
So I didn't know much about LA at the beginning of this book either. Everything in this, other than the literature that she was reading and her sort of barfly nature, because I love a themed bar, a tiki bar, whatever.
Love that.
Love. And sitting in LA, the home of the tiki bar. The birthplace. But we moved here from New York. I was regretting my decision. The whole world shut down. I couldn't understand LA at all, the way it was laid out. Everything was really uncomfortable to me, and leaving Manhattan is just hard if you've been there forever. So I was well, okay, I can't go anywhere, but I can at least drive around and look at the city from the inside of my car and read books about it. And
wow.
So I started to read about the city and kind of just try to get the layout. And through that, it obviously led me to the park. The park is so much to do with the city. And a lot of the city is actually designed to be a theme park of sorts. That was really what they were doing.
Wow.
I talk about it in my book, Maeve Fly.
Do you think LA is any different from, do you think LA and Disneyland are all that much different?
No, and in fact, that was intentional.
That's awesome.
It's really cool to learn about it. I read, in fact, I'm sure there are books at Village Well about it too, but they're just there's so much on the history of the city, programmatic architecture, which is what they were doing in the 20s, where they had buildings that looked like what they had inside. So you'll see the giant binoculars building, burgers, whatever. There are tons of them around town. And in many ways, this city was designed to be a place for people to come and visit and have this sort of Fantasyland experience. And that's what the park was too. They're both extensions of each other.
Well, yeah, we do have like Mirage Factory. I assume is that one? Yeah, and then like we have a whole good LA and California section in the bookstore of history. But that's really fascinating. I don't think I realized the connection to Disneyland even as the construction or the fabrication of these.
It's huge. And the Castle on Sunset, I don't know if you've read that about the chateau. That one talks about how the Strip came about, and it's just like it was a dirt road for many years.
Yeah, and now it's the main spot with the most billboards.
Yeah, with the most billboards, the biggest billboards.
I'm always blown away when I drive on Sunset, and I'm like, how do they have so many billboards? It's just everywhere. Yeah. I want to get back even to what you were saying with like you wanted to try to find a character that was able to explore these similar ideas as American Psycho and others. But because it felt to me like you were saying, like to explore kind of the alienation of this character. But I love that you said, but still loves things. Because I do feel like so much of like novels or literature or Wes Anderson movies where we explore this like disaffected, alienated character that is essentially nihilistic and apathetic, somewhat unhealthy, or ways that might not create the best society if everybody loved society that way. What did that look like to kind of earnestly pursue? This person actually loves life in this weird way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like we're pack animals, and but there are people like I consider myself like we're lucky to have a lot of friends and family, but I love being alone, and most of the things I do that I love, I prefer to do on my own, like listen to music or read or, explore new things. I think there's no greater joy than sitting at a bar by oneself with a book in hand. You know what I mean? It's just, that wasn't difficult for me. And I've always felt like books in which the main character has great loves and interests, those end up being my favorite books because it's like, also, I love the idea that you get to look at anything in a new way. So some of her loves and interests were things that I also loved, but some of them I was like, I don't care for that at all. And like through the course of writing the book, I was like, oh yeah, I totally love it.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, LA's the best one.
Yeah, right on.
This is like a city that I was like, this is a nightmare. What did I do? And now I don't know if I'm going to live anywhere else. So
wow. And you think you found that through exploring the book?
Yeah. So this is my big theory that I keep positing at every turn. But I think that if we stare at anything for long enough, we cannot help but fall in love with it. And I feel that I have to be careful what I write books about now because, and it's funny, my next book is actually about the Catholic Church, which is something a thing that I've had a great deal of struggle with in my life, and it's been a really interesting experience kind of like looking at it. I can't say I've totally fallen in love with it yet, but I'm still doing edits, so
that's so funny. It is interesting how much horror explores specifically the Catholic Church. I mean, with The Exorcist obviously, but there's so much of
it's very focused on, it's
demonology and all of that.
Absolutely. Demons and other sects, worship a whole and human figure, and Catholics like the crucified one. There's a lot of darkness there. But what I've found to love again is the ritual and the history and really a lot of excess when it comes down to it. I mean, that's what Anne Rice wrote about for many years. Is like they're pretty opulent places.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
The cathedrals and everything are massive.
But I think it's so cool. Maeve Fly was so bright as a horror novel, like calling it what it is. It's a horror novel, right? But there was like a bubbliness, an effervescence, and that's the nature of the setting. Yeah, the references you have, and like the idea of excess and campiness. What is your aesthetic as a horror writer?
Well, I love a lot of neon. I do. I love a shiny place. I think so. I read a lot of genre. I would say I read all kinds of books all the time. I should probably read more nonfiction, but I love romance novels and I love fantasy novels. I did in my early 20s. I read like every YA fantasy novel that existed.
Wow.
And romance is what I read kind of nonstop when I'm writing horror because, you know, it's like you need a reprieve, or at least I do.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, in my mind, the opposite.
Yeah.
When I think of horror or romance.
It's like a balm or something.
It can be, but I think like what I really wanted to do and what I want to keep doing is like, I actually mentioned Anne Rice, but she actually kind of like horror and romance and eroticism were always kind of tied together for her, which was interesting. But I think that there are horror novels that are really like, this is scary, this is dark, this is bleak, a lot of grief horror where it's like, this is hard. And you kind of live in like a black, I look at it as like a black gray zone for a book, right? Just color palette wise. And like, I really want to write books that sort of have a broad spectrum of color, and I want them to be scary and gross and gnarly and take you to the dark places and the things that are very difficult to look at.
But also they could be bright green and bright
why not?
purple and like light blue at the same time. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's so cool as a writer. You can really do whatever you want, you know? And it's like, I think I'm interested in like, how do we take the aspects that I love about a romance novel, for example. By the way, you could, I guess, categorize my book as a hockey romance, though. I don't want to spoil anything, but it does, romance genre might say no to that. But it's, you know, there are things that you can always take from different places, and I hope to keep doing that. And my main thing was I wanted to see a female monster who was not a victim first and who didn't have some big traumatic backstory, or if she does, she's not dwelling on it and she's not talking about it or thinking about it. And so it becomes about the freedom of action, which like realistically men have had in fiction forever. And I don't think that's something we need to toss aside. I think it's something we can participate in, and then everybody gets to do it and we get to celebrate all the great work in the world, you know?
I love that. Yeah. Anybody can be a villain.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's perfect.
That's perfect. I think one thing about this is like, I know Julia said something similar earlier, like I'm not a horror person.
Yeah.
Movies, books,
Fair
mostly
enough.
stay away. But then I think just like, what is your pitch for the idea of like using horror conventions to get these ideas across? Because to me, like you have an idea, you think, oh man, I want to explore this idea or this message. Yeah, I think just to me, it's just funny as a person who likes art or even likes to think of creating movies or books, but like the idea of using the horror genre to accomplish that never crosses my mind. So like where in that for you?
I mean, to me, it's like if you're writing a book at any time, you're saying what's the worst thing that could happen right now, right? Like I think that's creating tension.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, if you really want to talk about the worst thing, you know, I think there are writers who are always going to write about life, but a big part of life is death. And that's what I have always felt compelled to look at in writing, but also just like in life, you know, I think like we live with it. It's huge. It's looming. It impacts us left and right. And I had lost people before I wrote this, but I don't know. These are the stories I have. And I think by looking at what frightens us, by looking at this mortality that we have to dance with forever, that we have no real answers on, and nobody can give them to us. Like, it's crazy. There's no self-help book that's going to be like, hey, this is what happens, you know? I think, how could we not look at that? And I think that's where horror resides. It's just like, it's looking at death. It's looking at the fragility of the human body that we're given, which is kind of like deteriorating. What, after the age of 26?
Right,
we're just going downhill forever? I mean,
that's beautiful.
That's interesting. Is it beautiful?
No, I think it reminds me of Flannery O'Connor's view of the grotesque. Are you a Flannery O'Connor fan at all?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think the way you're describing horror as like this grotesque, but just like even a little bit more extreme.
Yeah, I think it's just looking at things that are as common as falling in love, right? Like you look at romance, falling in love, that happens all the time. Birth happens all the time. Quiet family dramas happen all the time. But death also happens all the time, and scary things happen all the time.
And we just ignore them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find it very freeing. I mean, I'm somebody who's always been afraid of things. I have nightmares every night of my life. I don't know why. I could be like the happiest I've ever been, and like that's where my brain is. And I think kind of leaning into it and not trying to shy away from it is I have found not only like empowering, but also just like kind of feels good. You know, like it kind of feels good to just be like, yeah, okay, we're dying. But, you know, other people are dying. So what do we do with this? And maybe it just comes down to like, I'm going to really, really enjoy my Piña Colada, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. Enjoy what we've got before we join the throngs of death.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of Maeve Fly is about grief, of course, and like the sort of like anticipatory grief, which is terrible.
It's about anticipating death. Anticipating.
It's the worst. You know, and that's something that every human being is going to contend with or has contended with at one point or other. And so.
Wow. That's beautiful. I think that's a good move into our final question.
Yeah. So this whole podcast is its own shelf talker about your book, Maeve Fly. But can you write a shelf talker for one book that you would recommend that you want somebody to pick up at Village Well?
Oh, wow.
Could be any book.
Can I do two? Because I just did actually an event with two authors at Village Well, and I want to pitch both their books right now.
And you're pitching events at Village Well. We love it.
Yes, a great event. That was a really fun event, by the way.
We love to hear
I really think this is a very special store and a great community space. But so Camp Damascus, Chuck Tingle. And Chuck Tingle has a whole history, by the way, of writing these tinglers. I don't know if you know about them. Go Google this. Go Google him if you have not. He's amazing.
Tingler is a genre?
Yeah, they're basically like short, very often like esoteric or even like sci-fi erotica of his that he's been writing for many, many years. And just definitely Google, you're going to enjoy it. But he wrote a horror novel, Camp Damascus, which is basically a young girl kind of like struggling with her sexuality, but also demons in the church, and it rocks.
Love it. And
the other one is Liz Caron's Night's Edge. And these are all on my same publisher. Nightfire is putting out great stuff. But Night's Edge is about a figurative and literal vampiric mother and her daughter who lives with her and is also actually kind of coming into her sexuality and is starting to branch out a bit in what happens there.
Wow.
They're both quite good.
Yeah, I'm
enticed.
I really am. I'm learning so much about this whole world
It's a big world.
It's so cool. So thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for giving these recommendations for people who enjoy horror of yours and people that they might enjoy similarly. Thank you for exploring horror. I think I am just on a quest to like figure out like what is in the mind of people who write these beautiful horror stories that to me just would never think. So thank you for explaining that. I think your explanation of all of that was really beautiful and really fun. I'm so glad. It's a big umbrella, you know, it's not all slashers out here, though of course Maeve Fly is. But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. Well, thank you so much. We had such a fun time with you, CJ. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been Shelf Talkers. We love talking to these shelves and what they say back. And thank you so much for joining us to talk about Maeve Fly, CJ. If you're listening on the podcast, stick around for a quick rundown of the events at Village Well in our upcoming couple weeks. We have events on our website. We do many readings like we had with CJ and the authors she mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for being here, CJ, and we're so excited to get to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan, and everybody go to Village Well. I might see you there.
Hi, everybody. Julia here. Quick update. Jared and I interviewed CJ Leede back in November 2023, and since then, CJ Leede's book, Maeve Fly, won the 2023 Octavia E. Butler Golden Poppy Award as presented by the California Booksellers Alliance. And for all y'all horror-specific fans out there, Maeve Fly was announced in January 2024 to be on the preliminary ballot for the Bram Stoker Award in Superior Achievement in First Novel. The Bram Stoker Award, the horror genre's most prestigious literary award. Way to go, CJ! And now, back to regular programming. And welcome back to the second segment of our podcast, Culver New Cane, our audio newsletter, where we talk about the events at the bookstore, and we also have a book recommendation. Today, we have a community member as a guest, and I'm here sitting with Jeff Moracle. Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
Hey, Julia. Doing great.
And so, Jeff, you're part of the community. You're a frequent workday visitor at the Village Well Books and Coffee Shop. What else are you up to?
So I've lived here in the community for the last 11 years. I work as a artist and architect, and in the past I actually also did a workshop at the bookstore where I teach people this folding pattern that I do in my art. I do these kind of large sculptures, almost like large-scale origami. There's this folding pattern that is very teachable to people within a sort of, about 30, 40-minute timeline. And, I kind of love sharing that with people because it kind of demystifies the work for them.
That workshop, I had just started working at the bookstore, and I remember seeing it, and I wasn't able to come. That was back in September. And then when Jen introduced us to last week, I thought, oh, I can't wait to have you go on our little Culver New Cane audio newsletter because I want people to know more about your art and your paper folding.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Happy to be here.
How did you get into folding paper as an art?
Actually, I grew up in suburban Orlando. And when I was a little kid, my neighbors had a Japanese exchange student that kind of initially introduced me to origami. And I think I was just so immediately drawn to it. There was something about taking something two-dimensional and turning it into something three-dimensional without adding anything to it that, I don't know, was just sort of fascinating to me. And then, with growing up in Orlando, my mom was a teacher, and so she had the summers off. We lived fairly close by to the whole Disney World complex. At that time, they were giving fairly inexpensive season passes to local residents. And so in the summers, I would want to go to Epcot over and over. And I'd always want to go to the Japan pavilion at Epcot and get like more origami paper and more origami books and stuff. And that was sort of what continued to like feed my interest in it. And then
Epcot is my favorite Disney
Epcot's
park.
The best one.
Yeah,
sure.
we always go to Epcot.
Yeah. That do you know what Epcot stands for?
There was a point when I did, because Jeff and I actually also share in our Orlando roots. My family also is from Orlando, and my dad helped dig the ditches to make Epcot possible. But what does Epcot stand for? I should know this.
That's awesome. Cool ditch digging. It is the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
Hey, and that segues perfectly into our book recommendation. So, Jeff, I'm actually just going to, because I love this segue, your book recommendation is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And Jeff, tell us about the book.
So, I was recommended this book by a number of friends, and I, for a lot of years, have been more of a nonfiction reader. I've read a lot of fiction when I was growing up, but this book, I was searching for some good fiction, and this book was kind of tossed into my lap. I'm about a third of the way into it, but the thing that's really drawing me into it is love the author's ability to kind of express the experience of being human, but through the world of gaming. This kind of desire to have multiple lives, do-overs, and the consequence of decisions. And, I also think it's really cool that you get this front row seat to the characters' like process of creation. So yeah, that's what's really keeping me like turning the pages each night with it.
I remember I grabbed that book maybe 2 years ago. I guess the year it came out. And now whenever folks come into the shop, people sometimes ask, I'm having a hard time getting into a book. I'm having a hard time getting back into reading after some time. And this book, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, is the book I always recommend to folks when they want to be enchanted by fiction all over again. And
great recommendation.
It's fun. And it's one of our best sellers. It's been one of our best sellers, of course, because it's set half of the book is set in Los Angeles, well, in Venice, but also in Echo Park.
Yeah. So I'm kind of they're kind of alluding to that because they talk about where the two characters. One of them grows up kind of in wealthy Beverly Hills. The other one grows up. I think he lives in
K-Town.
I think it's like he lives in Echo Park, but his grandparents have the pizza parlor in
He'll eventually live there. Yeah, you'll see. And because they come back.
Gotcha.
There's not too much spoiling, but as they're developing these games and as their career continues, because it's still coming of age, building Roman story, they'll eventually come back to LA metro area to develop their work.
My friend in Seattle who recommended the book specifically said that. She was like, oh, you're such a like LA nerd, you're gonna love it.
Yeah. And for me, everybody that's listening to the podcast, I just moved to LA 3 years ago, and reading this book was a just a boon for me because I was able to learn all about the city. I mean, I got to learn about each individual neighborhood. Gabrielle Zevin, she does such a great job giving so much character, not just to the city of LA, but each individual neighborhood.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I just love this book, as maybe folks can tell. But what I think is funny is this is yet another Shakespeare reference for anybody listening last week. We had Birnam Wood was the recommendation this week. It's
Tomorrow.
And it is a quote from Macbeth, just like last week. The quote is, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this penny pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. But you're thinking about Village Well and what's happening in the shop. Tomorrow night, we have our cyberpunk future, a discussion of science fiction and the near now with Jared Shurin and Anne C. Perry. So Jared Shurin came in all the way from overseas, and he's going to be a special guest talking about his cyberpunk anthology. And then on Friday night, we have a board game, our regular monthly board game night. Upcoming next week is our book club, our general book club book, and we'll be discussing Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And many more things. So go online if you want to and learn more about what events we have at the shop. And thanks so much, Jeff, for being with me in our little studio today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Julia.
Yeah, that was such a great recommendation. I'm excited.
Oh yeah, I'm on a fiction train now. I gotta find a second recommendation, so I'll check in on the podcast for future recommendations.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll see you on the store.
You'll see you there.
This episode of Shelf Talkers is brought to you by Village Well Books and Coffee, was produced by Jared Kassabaum and Julia Elizabeth Evans, edited by Julia Elizabeth Evans, and our theme music is from Noah Vickland. Until next time, keep reading.